Anyway, here's some of the, there's two of the blue-green algae species that found in Clear Lake, Limbia on the left, and then Microcystis. Both of these produce neurotoxins and foul odors. The Limbia, as it's growing in back bays and docks, is lifting the docks and the boats right out of the water, at least a foot. I've never seen anything like it. It's really unreal. And we know, we took water samples and tests, and we treated this condition in the water, and we can stop this. One of our treatments was for the Department of Fish and Game in the West Bahia Pond, and it was a 110-acre pond. It smelled like sewage. It's one of the worst smelling places I've ever walked into. In fact, I thought they had a sewage leak. I was looking at the shoreline, and I found out this particular blue-green algae flocculates material on the shore that looked just like stools. I thought, oh, you got a sewage break. This, gee. Not so, whoops, what happened? Oh. The creature there was Anabaena spiroides. And Anabaena is highly toxic. And you don't want to be breathing the neurotoxins in it. In fact, what they found out was that most of the neurological problems, when they started mapping them across the United States, most of the people lived around lakes, which I found fascinating. Okay, well, pollution and heat favor the pathogenic species. In this particular case, this had hydrogen sulfide concentrations of 300 parts per million. The air quality board goes crazy at 30. Okay, so this is 10 times higher. We treated this, and in 8 months, the fish and wildlife were back in the pond. This is the product that was used. I mean, this is real high tech. Mixing it up, you know, with a paddle in a bucket. It doesn't really take much. It comes as dry powder. You put it in, and you stir it all up. And in this particular case, we had the Marin Sonoma Mosquito Abatement District did most of the treatment because they had the equipment, which saved everybody a lot of money. We were on a state contract, and they were trying to keep it cheap, which we appreciated. Anyway, at the end of the time, this was the only pond that had fish and wildlife on it. Okay? We recovered this pond. And if you look at the shoreline there's no flocculation. The egrets are back in. And it was real high. I mean, it was real happy about all that. Now let's talk about soils. This was some alarming Mount Shasta data. Did this kind of backward, but the sample, these were taken by gee, I had a mental block here for a second. Anyway, the aluminum concentrations were 61,000 micrograms per liter. Normal should be 0.5. Okay? 50 is maximum for drinking water. 1,000, you're supposed to be reporting it to the federal agencies. You're supposed to take action. These were lab tests. Well, Francis Mangles. These were lab tests that were sent in, and nobody did a thing about it. Zero. Okay, and then he also looked at soil. This is a real shock, okay? The forest soil pH is historic in that area 5.5, which is slightly acidic. In fact, it's fairly acidic. It's now 6.8, which is 10 times more alkaline. That changes the bacteria in the soils. It has a huge effect on bacteria. That has a huge effect on the assimilation of nutrients by the plants. And stream insects, 20 years ago measured over 1,000 per sample, now less than 30. Well, it looks like it's killing the ecosystem. And we're finding this all over. We are in serious trouble, people, with what's going on in our environment, and most people don't realize it. Okay? Well, the changes in the skies. I was handed a video in 2002. Now, I've been a wildlife biologist working on the ground, and I had been out of the Air Force for quite a while, but I was still a trained meteorologist. Anyway, they handed me the video and says, well, what do you think of this? Well, I put it in and played it, and I didn't get too far into it. And I went, oh my God, I've been looking at the trees and at the ground. I haven't been looking up. I wasn't paying attention. Like we all do, we get involved in different aspects of things, and we don't always see all of it. Well, in this particular case, when I saw, they called it chemtrails. Well, that was my introduction to the term. And I thought, well, I didn't really know what that was. And then I heard persistent jet clouds. But it was really obvious to me when I looked at the video that it was a spray program. The planes were doing grid pattern flying. And I thought, well, that doesn't look like anything a commercial airline would do. So I got even more curious. I really started my investigation. I got out my telescope. I started looking at planes. I started watching them. Well, I want to go to a definition of contrails and chemtrails, okay? And I rather like the term, because it doesn't matter what you say, you're going to be called a goof anyway. So contrails, by definition, are condensation trails formed by jet exhaust, nuclei, and water vapor that form ice crystals. Well, they generally dissipate really rapidly in the atmosphere. They don't persist. If you have a particle in the atmosphere that persists, it's got to be nano-sized to be able to stay in the sky as long as it's been staying in the sky. Well, what in the world? That has to be some kind of solid particle if it's nano-sized. I'm going through a deductive process here right now, okay? It became obvious to me that they're not contrails. It's an intentional spraying program, and it's not unintended consequences that they would have you believe. You look at a jet engine, and nothing is going to go well unless they change fuel, and I need to look at what Rosalind said earlier about what may be coming through the jet exhaust. But there aren't any of these nuclei that I'm saying that would be going through that turbojet that would survive it. Now, if you look at the bottom picture, the bypass line may be the feed line for whatever else they're adding to be able to pick up whatever water vapor and nuclei that are coming out of the jet engines. Now, this is obviously not jet exhaust. And I've seen that on an awful lot of aircraft. So I'll call it a typical chemtrail, and so it begins. This is at 35,000 feet. You notice right away it has an enormous trail behind it. It doesn't have a little short trail. Generally it's a short trail and they're not ballooned out too far. It's a narrow exhaust that doesn't go very far. 5 to 10 lengths of the aircraft at the most. These things go for a long way. The trails then spread into clouds and haze that drift to the ground. And cirrus clouds form a high-thin overcast. Well, in the weather technology, the high-thin overcast symbols I use here, I used to plot a lot when we were doing weather maps. And that is the symbol for a high-thin overcast. Well, that would reflect sunlight. It would also contain the atmosphere, like an envelope. Everything below it, okay? And we'll talk about the envelope. Here's a typical spray line. I was on my way to Chicago in this picture. It's really obvious where you can see the trails that were left by the jets underneath, and the haze all the way to the ground. And we have a lot of unnatural clouds and sky cover. I understand that the nuclei in this particular, the puffs in here were said to be boron. Well, anything you use for making clouds is probably of the water-loving salt variety, metallic salts. Well, actually, I have no idea what was in these. Right. You know, and they say, oh, these are all tests, and we're going to test this and test it. These tests have been going on for 20 years or over. How long do you have to test? It's the same program. They're spraying almost every day. We've got jet spraying here today. It's just that they're up in a dry air layer, and I don't know what particular particles they're using. But they're really long trails, and they're dropping down as haze without forming clouds.